box has to pop up. Okay, now you can introduce yourself for the record.
Good afternoon, Laura DePietro, Agency of Agriculture Water Quality Division. Normally with me is Nina Gage, who you may run into from time to time. She's the assistant director, so either one of us can give you all the answers you need. Sorry. Okay. So generally the things we do is we educate, we help implement projects, we provide financial assistance, and we regulate. Okay, that's what we do on farms. We also are involved statewide. There's a lot of planning processes. You probably listen to all kinds of people throughout the years, but agriculture and water quality is part of a bigger water quality family. And everybody has to plan to figure out how you're going to accomplish goals, and that helps you get your money. It's the whole cycle, right? So it's been going on for decades. It's a requirement of EPA to the state. And so we're very involved in that process, and it goes all the way down to the very local level. We also help people. So a couple of years ago, a lot of this presentation is based on Act 64 of 2015, which was the big, Vermont Clean Water Act. So a lot of changes happened. And so I'm going to kind of give you a summary. It's been a decade since that occurred of what has happened in that decade. Because prior to that, we didn't have a lot of this resource, right? And so showing you what we've done with the capacity that the legislative body has given us. So one of the things that was required in that process was farmers had to get education. They couldn't, you basically had to achieve this education in order to farm, essentially, right? And so these classes, these resources, we empowered a bunch of partners to do that, because you've heard from lots of people, right? Lots of people are doing great work with agricultural operators. And so we empowered them to take this kind of work on. And that goes on today. You can see in this chart, the blue chunk up there in that upper graph, it's labeled Ag CWIP is how we use that acronym. That's basically money to all of our partners. So when you think of conservation districts, you think of UVM extension, those folks who are really doing big education programs, the big chunk of it is that. And then, above that is a lot of our staff and partners working directly on the ground with farmers to help them implement stuff. And then you can see the number of classes that we do, collectively. One of the cool things I'll show you is every grant and money we've given out to farmers, because one of our goals was, when you asked us to do all this stuff, we said we have to be accountable. This is a lot of money. There's a lot of expectation. And so all of the partners have to put this information into a database that is allowing us to give you this data, right? So we track everything at a very detailed level. I'm going to flip this page and that page. Maybe you saw a difference, but I think you probably just saw a bunch of letters. So these are 2 pages of the programs that we offer to farmers. These programs are very specific to, I have a problem, I need help designing and figuring out what to do, and I need some financial resources. One thing to keep in mind is farming costs a lot of money. Water quality practices do not typically make money on the farm, right? They have an inherent benefit, absolutely. But to tell a bank or someone who you're trying to cash flow to that a implement that you're buying so that you can still plant corn, but you're planting it differently is worthwhile, is very challenging, right? Because it's some of these pieces of equipment are hundreds of thousands of dollars. So these programs that we run are created so that farmers can get those practices, can make those improvements and take those extra steps on their farm without having to hurt their bottom line at a level that may be seriously impactful. So that's what these programs do. And if you have any questions about any of these programs, I will go into them. A couple of them I just want to highlight at the bottom here, in the middle here. These are programs where we've reached out and gotten substantial federal money, because that's the other thing we do. Hello. Is we make sure we seek out opportunities. We've gotten millions of dollars of federal money to come to Vermont, to come for farmers to be able to access, to implement all these practices. And I think a big part of that is just, having the capacity and resources of people to go and get that money, and then to move it on the ground. And so you can see here, back when we started this conversation about Act 64 2015, we didn't have very much money at all. When you think about, there were about 6,000 farms at that time. That's not enough money to make an impact in having farmers implement water quality projects. It's just not. But you can see we're up to 18.4 million. And that's a combination of just again, seeking federal funds, federal partners also got a great deal of new money coming in. And then the Clean Water Fund, that was a huge piece. If you look at the bar chart, the turquoisey color is the Clean Water Fund. Having that dedicated fund for water quality for farm improvements is very important, because you'll see these numbers track with the progress. Farm.
Clean Water Fund is state funding. Not everybody might know that. Just looking at the other sources.
So American Rescue Plan Act was federal. Capital funds are state. Clean water funds are state. General funds are state. Lake Champlain Basin Program is a federal partner, so that's an avenue where a lot of federal dollars, either EPA, Great Lakes Fishery Commission, or heritage programs will come through that door. Special funds are from fees that are raised by the agency, charged for things like fees on pesticide registrations and stuff like that. And then USDA NRCS is the Natural Resource Conservation Service. It's a federal partner. And so it's grant monies that we've gotten from them for ourselves to operate.
Thank you, Chairman. Would the USDA NRCS grants, would that be part of the farm bill, like the money that we would receive over the 5-year lifespan of the farm bill? Is that lumped into that as well?
So to answer that, yes, this is the same money, and it would apply to you in the same way that the farm bill rules may apply, depending on the program. But these are monies that the Agency of Agriculture applied for and got as a separate pot for you. So there's still EQIP for farmers, and then this money is carved off the top, basically, of EQIP or another program at NRCS and given out through these grants this other way.
And so the reason why there's substantially more in 23 than it was in 24 is because the farm bill came out, you applied for these funds, and now the farm bill's in limbo and you gotta wait till it rolls over again?
Well, I hope it rolls over soon. It was just a funding opportunity, and their ability to finally let us know we got that opportunity and to deploy it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Representative O'Brien?
Laura, have you ever tracked how much, water quality program funds were spent on farms that are no longer in business?
So we just recently, and I don't have hard data to give you, but I asked those questions too, because that's one of these things. If people are like, you're just putting all this money on, all these farms are going out of business. That is not true, right? We looked through all our whole last, I think it was 4 years or 5 years of program dollars. We were just looking at one program. And it was for the equipment, to make sure that the equipment was still being utilized. And there was one farm that was no longer using it, right? But they had plans to figure out, they were trying to sell and figure out what they were going to do with it. So it's like still fresh, but it's not something you see, right? People who farm because they love it. They don't get out of it very easily or lightheartedly. And when they do, often they continue to farm, but just in a different operational management system. And that equipment and that asset and that land base that still needs those assets is still there, right? So that we're not seeing that the investments are lost. They're just used under a different operator, essentially.
Is that one quote that's always stuck with me is Jen Lambert, this dairy farmer from Washington County, Washington, I think, said, I could give you a tour of all these farms with empty manure pits right now. And I know, like, even in Tunbridge, we spent, because my brother-in-law did a lot of the work on it, hundreds of thousands of dollars in concrete and rebar on the manure pit, and then the farm will out the next year. So just interesting how it was federal dollars for the most part.
It's federal dollars.
Well, expensive though.
Yeah. Well, and at some point, I will say things get old, right? And there was a huge push back in the 80s for a bunch of manure pits and things like that through the federal government because there was no overwinter storage. Those don't meet today's standards, right? So at some level, though you see relics in the landscape, that may not be the worst thing, right? Because some of them may not today be what we would expect to see out there for protection because we get smarter. Hopefully that's the goal as a society.
So it would be functionally obsolete.
A new farmer would have to upgrade it to utilize it in many instances. But I mean, we're talking decades. So, it's well beyond its actual lifespan. I don't see projects that are within their lifespan just being frowned upon. That's a good asset. If you have a farm that has good infrastructure, that's a good asset, right? So we did something. Farmers and the agency were able to quantify, and the partners what's happening. And, you know, we talk about this graphic a lot, but I really want to hammer home. The legislature asked the Agency of Agriculture, implement and make sure you regulate farms. We worked with farms, we did that. Every year, the farms are the ones that we can show you they're doing it, and they're doing it more than 90%. Some years, 98% of the reductions are coming from farms, not from wastewater treatment plants, not from, you know, stormwater reduction practices. Those are in there too. Natural resource practices are in there as well. The farms are dominating this landscape in terms of what they're doing on their land. So huge ability to make progress. And when you look at the overall progress on Lake Champlain, the 33 and the 26%, I'll just cover that. So the ag sector has a goal. See the yellow slice of the pie on the left? That is what they produce for phosphorus in Lake Champlain. It's all estimated, but the pie chart on the right is what they have to reduce. And if you notice, they're a bigger piece of the reduction pie. So farms have to reduce more than any other sector compared to what they generate. So they have a huge bar, and they've stepped up to it because statewide, the goal of what has to be reduced in that right-hand yellow pie, farms have already achieved 33% of that reduction. Statewide, all sectors have accomplished about 26% or a quarter of the overall reduction goal for Lake Champlain. So keep in mind then, that impact of being 77% of the state reductions only costs 24% of the budget. Ag is incredibly cost efficient to get a pound of phosphorus, right? So willing farmers, good practices, healthier landscape, it's happening. People are doing it.
Laura, when you develop, say, BMPs to reduce phosphorus use on farms, like in this here, have those been applied statewide to the farms, or is it really just the farms in the Champlain watershed that are having to?
Nope,
to follow this?
these are statewide rules that we did. It was asked of us, right? Statewide rules, and it makes sense because people operate across boundaries, consistency across the state. But, you know, here's the Memphremagog watershed, same dashboard, same data, same response. So, because there's a TMDL for Lake Memphremagog, there's a TMDL, total maximum daily load. It's a phosphorus budget in this case, right? So for Lake Champlain, they have a phosphorus budget, and for Memphremagog, there's a lot of phosphorus budget. Connecticut River has a nitrogen budget because it goes into the ocean, and when you have nutrients going in the ocean, they have nitrogen, you get different problems. When you're going into freshwater, phosphorus is really what you're typically more concerned about for water quality. So it's statewide.
So like the St. Pierre's and Richard and the Gladstones were all doing the same.
Same things.
Okay.
They do different ones because they have different landscapes, right? Like that is the most important thing. When you think about how you regulate agriculture, it is not one size fits all, right? An apple orchard is very different than a dairy farm. And they all fall under the same set of rules. So each time you apply that rule, you have to think about what is actually working on that farm and how you make that fit. So I won't go too detailed, but again, you can see the same progress is happening in Memphremagog.
Representative Lipsky had a question too there.
Or this is going back where you had magenta, like several colors.
And multicolored.
That one. And ARPA is the purple.
Yeah,
Is ARPA gonna end?
Mhm.
When?
it's already pretty much
Okay.
ending.
So
We
we
had to
won't see
allocate all the
purple
money
there.
already.
So I guess as far as making up for that, you know, it's almost in 2024 was almost 50% or 45%.
One thing you will notice is the capital funds went down in those years. And so I think that that's where you'll see some of that space gained back.
And who provides capital on or federal government?
You all do.
Okay, so that's serious.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so the progress in Memphremagog is not at the same accelerated rate as Lake Champlain, but it is not far behind because we started this after we did Lake Champlain, right? We had to put all that in place because we had to address the hubbub that went with that process, but this is coming up and it's coming up quick.
Nelson.
Thank you, Jim. Monday, we meet with the Orleans County Conservation District and the Memphremagog watershed people. And, I think we're gonna hear we dropped the park pavilion like 2.
Okay,
I think that's the news I'm hearing
on the
So-
water.
on, yeah, the Foster's Load Memphremagog. So when I hear that, I will call you and I'll be,
I would love that. It's happening. I mean, like, this is the wild thing, like. It was asked of us to do this and the farmers, I think, why this was so successful, and maybe I'm like. Dreaming, but. When this all thing started. We started a process where we spent over a year, almost 2 years, with farmers, with people who work with farmers. And the government agencies, and we sat down and we got a facilitator and we sat down and we were like, things have to change. What works? And when people have buy-in for something, when you're talking about social change and changing how they operate, that empowered them. And then, you know, we had a huge outreach. We did over 90 meetings to discuss the RAPs with people in the state. People knew what was going on. And if they didn't like it, they at least understood, hopefully, why it was going on. And so, you know, like, I think that has a lot to say about farms care, and they'll do it if you explain to them why it's important to do it. Long Island Sound is still underway. Again, that's a longer, Vermont is not as big of a slice of that, because it's a lot of the wastewater treatment facilities and other things that are much more farther downstream in other states. And one cool thing we have, you know, Vermont is just, because like everybody likes to get together and talk about things, right? It's not all these silos like some other states are just miles and miles apart. Our partnership of all the people who are, you know, at a level that they can sign an MOU together and share information and work together to make sure that all of these dollars coming into the state and all of these resources and people are aligned to not waste resources. Right? It's here, and it is one of the most efficient processes I've ever seen of a lot of people. I mean, we have an annual meeting, which we didn't have last year, but we're gonna have it again this year, of this group. And, you know, there's well over like 120 people who are working with farms in Vermont in some capacity that come and listen to all of this stuff and get educated and stay connected. And we have, from this group, there's like little groups that meet, you know, you're gonna go meet with one on Monday, right? Like all of these people are organized to just constantly keep feeding up into the system and making sure everything is organized. And it's not always perfect, but it's amazing that we have a system like this in Vermont. Most other states really struggle to have agencies at this level communicate. Okay, so just a few pretty pictures to show you what we do, because that's easier to get the message. You can have a hillside that's just got manure and mud and sediment all just running down the stream, or you can put in a concrete barnyard where they can scrape it and they can move it to a manure pit and apply it to a nutrient based on a nutrient management plan, right? So that's the kind of capital infrastructural improvements we help farmers do. One cool thing about our agency is we've been around for a while. We can do these beautiful 14-year later pictures, right? We have been doing this work a very long time, and the progress that I can tell you I've seen, I've been here 20 years, it's phenomenal what people have done. And, you know, this is just an example. You can see this, I think it's 108, if you're driving up that way. See the changes up in Franklin County. This was a pasture that obviously needed some work there. So a fence got put up, strip got put down, and alternative watering sources, right? Just animals can still access water in Vermont if they need it. We have a lot of pastures that there's no power, there's no nothing anywhere near, but there is water and there is gravity. And so we can help with alternative water systems to keep them out. Here's a photo that is a beautiful filter strip up in the Northeast Kingdom. And this is a volunteer farmer decided to do this on their own. Wasn't sure if he'd take credit. And, you know, this is bigger than what's required. What's required is 25 feet. This farm chose to go 50 feet.
70.
70, there you go. I gotta update that. But in essence, it allows you to farm it. And also, you know, one thing about filter strips is nutrients go into filter strips, right? All of the land above this that runs into this is going to put nutrients in that filter strip. If you harvest those nutrients and they're no longer there, sitting in the buffer right next to the stream. And so the cycle of being able to harvest them is a beneficial space rather than just letting the nutrients sit and build up over time.
Richard, where's the water?
So So there is, and actually, it's not a stream, qualified not a stream. But this is with a project that we're doing with the land trust. And we put this buffer strip in, and we started at the road. And we went down and all the way around the field one way, came back up the other way and all the way back around to the road at the far end of the field. 70 feet wide because our grass harvester is 35. So we make 2 passes. We merge it into one windrow. We pop in, we chop it around, chop it back the other way. We cannot apply manure within so many feet of it, even if it's. Laura and I have this great debate over a stream or a ditch. We can not apply manure within so many feet of a ditch. And we would have issues. And there's some slope to that. So now we're 70 feet away. When it rains, and it rains up there in the Northeast Kingdom, it runs into the grass, it goes nowhere. By the way, I wish we had another picture taken a little later because the cover crop on the rest of that field was this tall as snowfly.
I know we have another picture. I'll try and put it in another presentation.
And matter of fact, I think you see the cover crop back there behind the buffer strip. That is cover crop going. So great project. My father, 83 years old, probably one of Laura's biggest nemesis when she started. And my father is out there and he is celebrating it. And he said, why haven't we done this 100 years ago? So
This is leading, right? Most farms are not doing this. And we just revamped this program so that it would fit better with farms because it wasn't moving and there weren't a lot of projects going on. And so hopefully with the revisions that we've done and some cheerleading from the crowd, more farmers will do this as an opportunity.
Representative O'Brien.
Who pays for this?
The state. The farmer still has a stake in it though. We don't pay 100%. So, you know, we don't, the time that they put in there, the fuel, the seed, you know, after they do it all, this doesn't cover.
It was a lot of fun trying to do that this summer with the weather events. We worked at soil twice to get it done.
Lori, does a farmer who enrolls, can they be expecting annually some help? Is it a one-time thing?
We try and set it up so that we're not continually having a long-term financial relationship. So we set it up so that, you know, we're not paying small checks every year. Administratively, that costs a lot more programmatically. So we try and focus on just getting it done. These have 10-year lifespans. And we check on them from time to time to make sure that they're still implemented. And of course, you know, large farms, they get inspected annually as well, in addition to program checks.
That's 14 acres of buffer around about 100 acres of cornfield.
Significant amount.
Yeah.
But we can still harvest it and feed the cows, and it's great species of grass. Their mix worked well with what we wanted, very well.
But it's an incentive, not an RAP.
Correct. The RIPs, if it's a stream, it would be 25-foot setback. If it was a ditch, it'd be 10 feet. So the farms can't go that close with their equipment in terms of tillage, and they can't spread manure that close to a stream. So being able to harvest it changes how you can see your buffers.
And essentially, in full disclosure, the fees, the program pretty much covered the seed in the initial fertility for the seed.
Mhm.
And it was our labor and whatnot, and then we have to maintain it. And 7 year, but we plan on leaving it forever. We're gonna work it that way. We like it.
Representative Lipsky.
I don't want to get off topic, but the nutritional value of, is that haylage, you're blending haylage with the corn crop? Are there positive nutritional values?
Absolutely huge. And new crop grass is way better than the old heritage species that take over time.
Yeah, and one of the things, you know, when we made the buffer requirements, one of the things we saw is people just backed out and then let the weeds grow up. And while weeds were very good at growing vegetation in Vermont, they're not as good or as dense as what this will be because it'll be managed. So this is actually one of the goals for the program too, is just to make better buffers. Okay, so re-regulate farms, we do this, in coordination with the Agency of Natural Resources and then also the Attorney General's office. Because if the state were ever to go to court, which, you know, you hope you don't, that's the entity that supports the state in doing any of that work. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a minute, but I'm trying to think about some of the major things. Like there's been a lot that we have done as an agency in the 10 years since Act 64. And lightheartedly, like it sounds easy to just throw this list out, but when you really dig into what this list is, it's a lot of time. You know, just rulemaking alone is not an easy feat. We've done it multiple times. We've created new standards. We've set up entire new programs to certify people, especially custom applicators, right? The people who spread manure all have to be certified in the state of Vermont now in order to go and spread manure. And so there's just a lot here. The other pieces are that, again, I told you, we focused on making sure we, at the same time, invested in making sure we could track all of this. And so we did invest in database, and I'll show you a little bit more about that at the end of some of the power and tools that we have to go with that. But just hiring people, hiring people takes a while. And, you know, today we started, we had 13 people, now we have 33 people. And, you know, I can tell you every single person who works at the agency is very dedicated to the outdoors, and they are dedicated to farming, and they're dedicated to water quality. And so I personally really enjoy our team because I think we have a really good balance and perspective to try and bring to this work, because this work is not easy. Couple details I just want to share. So since this happened, this Act 64, Vermont has lost 350 dairy farms. That's a lot of dairy farms considering how many are left.
How many are there?
I think it's down to 400,
24, maybe 422.
41.
but yeah,
That's
it's
a lot.
in the 400s. When I started here, it was over 1,000. And so it's just moving so much quicker these days. And, you know, with that, with 72,000 acres of cropland and pasture that those farms operated. And again, I think you may see some resurgence in that, but I also look at our state and I look at what I see happening from my perspective is there are a lot of people moving in. There aren't that many restrictions. And with the money and resources that these people do have coming out of state, cropland looks pretty good for housing, right? And you won't get it back. You know, if we don't have a place to grow food, we're not going to be very sustainable over the long term. And so as you're watching these farms go out of business, you've got to reflect what impact that's going to have in the change of our land use in the state of Vermont. In 2022, 57% of all farms were unprofitable in Vermont. You kind of ask yourself, why do they still do it? Because it feels good, right? Like farming is incredibly important and valuable. And when you do it, you have a connection. And so people aren't going to stop farming. Right? We see this. We saw the shift where someone else worked off the farm to provide an income. You know, that shift happened over the last 100 years. And you're still seeing that people are still going to keep farming. It's important. But what that says is, don't forget how tightly pushed these folks are at this point, right? Because they're trying to keep this all working. And while those kind of pressures were against people, they implemented 500,000 acres of conservation practices. I showed you those yellow bar charts. That's in the same time period, right? So I say all of that because the reality is these farms, we have a job to do, right? We have to regulate farms. This is not a fun job, right? Showing up at someone's place and explaining to them what they may or may not have done wrong brings out sometimes the worst in people, right? And it's not because of who you are or what you're doing, it's because of all those other stresses, right? So our staff are yelled at very, very much, right? Like that is real. And, you know, we train them in all of that to manage it. I think what's worse than getting yelled at, you can get yelled at because usually people blow off steam and then they kind of come back down and they apologize to you, right? And like, it's not you, it's whatever else is going on.
We're all used to that.
Right? they're crying, right? People, grown men. This is real to them. This is their life. And if you don't sit there and understand your role and how all this works and watching all of this land go out of production and watching as the regulations keep squeezing, meanwhile, they're doing them. You got to open your eyes, right? Vermont has really good regulations. We have better regulations than most states in the country. Okay, most states don't have, I'll show you in a second, some of the regulations in other nearby states. You have to have an appreciation for where we're at and that farmers are doing it, okay? Because if you don't, I don't think you're gonna have farms if you keep pushing to some level, right? You're gonna end up with more bigger farms. The smaller farms cannot absorb the levels that I think could be pushed on them. With that said, though, that is the job we have to do, right? And we do this job. If you look at this lower bar chart or line chart, you can kind of see it's like on average about 50 enforcement actions a year on farms. Since Act 64, it is basically doubled, right? So the enforcement, give capacity to the resource, have more cops out on the road, right? You see more violations. And so you're seeing that. And so we hold these farms accountable. Last year, we did 334 visits that individually respond with a report to a farmer about what they are or are not doing wrong, right? That's a lot of work for a few people. The bar chart on the top, you can see this year, 55 farms were sent over. We have an MOU, which we'll talk about a little bit more tomorrow, with ANR. We sent 55 farms over to ANR saying they might have something that looks like it could be getting to water. You should investigate and see what's going on or use our report or whatever means, you need to do. These are 55 farms we think need to be looked at. And what's interesting, you can see that turquoise chart over time, the majority of those farms are not your big farms, right? Over the whole, because big farms have invested a lot in their infrastructure. It is a lot of small farm challenges. They don't have that much labor on the farm and they're trying to do it all. And the reality is it's difficult to do it all and make these investments. So you've got a wide breadth of challenges out there. And I don't think it's necessarily farm specific. I think you've got to be aware that it is applied across the board.
Laura, can you just clarify the referrals to DEC, ANR? Are those just for certain farms, larger farms?
No, those are all anything we see. It could be on, we technically have a low threshold where we're regulating. The reality is we regulate everything because most municipalities don't have the capacity to. And if a farm can demonstrate they meet minimum qualifications, they can be put under the REPs. So it could literally be somebody who, sells goat's milk and has a few goats and somebody's upset about them, right? It literally could be that space, or it could be someone with 2,000 mature dairy cows. Either one. If they have a pipe going from the milk house to the brook, it's the same in terms of whether it gets referred or not.
Everything else?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Your production area. What's this? This just last year's?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
I would expect through education and, because the production area is all newer than the whole project. Am I right?
Yeah, well, one thing the caution with some of this stuff is remember, and I'm going to get into this, I'm probably going to run out of time. Our rules are built to prevent water quality issues from happening, right? The federal rules, when you hear CAFO, it is literally, there is a discharge happening. That's what's permitting, right? Which means you have to stop it essentially. But we have rules, because you've asked us to put them in place, that say, before it even gets there, let's stop it. So in that production area, that looks high. The reality is if you're familiar with some of the practices, it doesn't mean it's getting to water, right? It means that you're not managing whatever we got put in, right? So if we put in with the state assistance, something to manage your waste and the waste is going outside of that structure, that's a concern. It needs to be in the structure, right? And so while that looks like there's all these farms that are just having all these problems, it's not about pollution all the time, right? So you got to keep that in mind.
Representative Superman.
Thank you so much for this. I do just want to say that the emotions tied up in agriculture are not specific to grown men, and that there are a lot of folks who are experiencing barriers within that. And then also, I do hear the point that big farms have invested a lot, and so we should also be aware of all sides of agriculture. But I'm wondering if there's a correlation between big farms receiving additional grants and supports and resources, which is why they're able to invest in that, versus how much small farms have received, and if you have those numbers.
Yeah, I have an entire dashboard that I'm gonna have at the end of this presentation. You can probably beat me to it because you probably have it, which is a Power BI. So you can see, we actually invest a lot in small farms, a significant amount in small farms, more than we invest often in large farms, because there's many of them, right? That's the majority of the folks that we end up working with. There's only a handful of large farms. So I think it truly is about capacity and just ability to manage, right? These larger farms, some of them, they might employ and create jobs, like 50 jobs within their region. A small farm may be doing it part-time and working another job, right? So the ability to manage it is just, it's truly what I see. But the program and the opportunities, it's equal for all, right? And there are some that are more catered to be specific for small farms, like grazing and stuff like that, which are not obviously as signed up by other farms of other types. So there's something for everyone. Okay, so I pointed out that the federal structure is for point sources. So it is a discharge happening, and the role of the Agency of Agriculture is to prevent that from happening. So non-point source, so stuff that's not clear and direct. And so what we've set up is we have 3 sets of rules. We use acronyms all the time, but required ag practices, medium farm operation rules, and large farm operation rules are the main rules that we have for farms to regulate in the state. RAPs apply to all farms, medium to a certain size and large to a certain size. So one thing I wanted to state about what CAFO is just to make sure people are understanding. CAFO has been through a few iterations of rulemaking, and each time the EPA has actually been shot down essentially by a court case. So they would make a rule and say, well, we want to regulate and control. I'm sorry, let me move my box so I can read it and not read over my head. But the first one they had, the 2003 rule, it said anybody who has a potential to discharge has to get a permit. So we think you might discharge, you need to get a permit. And the waterkeeper decision from the court said, no, you only have the authority in CAFO to regulate and control only actual discharges, not potential discharges. So then EPA tried again, and they said, well, we think if you're designed, constructed, operated, and maintained such that a discharge would occur, then you need to get a permit. That to me sounds like you can see it, right? Like it's designed to go here. And the court case said, no, you cannot. Proposed a discharge does not work. You have to have an actual discharge. So in this conversation, just to be understanding of what that topic is, and we'll talk a little more tomorrow, CAFO is about an actual discharge. And everything else that the Agency of Ag does is everything but that, right? And so the federal rule only applies to this slice. And there's a lot more potential challenges, right? Which is what we're already addressing, and I'm showing you the accomplishments for that.
Representative O'Brien?
Just quickly, Laura, when there's a point source violation, say the ANR, identifies on a farm, can the farm use the Agency of Ag and certain, say, federal and state programs to access funds for remediation? I mean, is there a sort of a partnership
Yes
there?
and no. So currently we have none in Vermont, but if a farm becomes a CAFO, they are no longer eligible for any EPA money. So there are challenges in that space, but NRCS money and Agency of Ag money that is not 319 EPA money, yes, could. But in federal law, if you are a CAFO, you cannot. So EPA has you implement the program, but not the financial part of it.
Or we've got just about 5 more minutes, and I want to give you the flexibility of stopping anytime between now and then if you feel like you're at a good stopping point. We can pick it up again
I think,
tomorrow.
let me flip through, because tomorrow we'll talk about CAPE a little more, and I'll explain to you a couple things, but so let me just bounce to this, and then I'll come back to the other conversation tomorrow. So this is the Power BI that we have created with all of this data that we get into databases.
What's that mean? Power BI.
Business innovation. Stop share and reshare. To a new screen. So essentially, it's the ability to take and look at things any combination of ways you want to, right? And so if you want to drive this yourself, you have access to it. The end of that PowerPoint will give you that link. But there's in the bottom here, where you, there's pages. And so you can click that and you can learn, here's instructions for how to do all of this if you're trying to figure out and don't have me here to explain it. There's a summary page of everything in 2024 that went on, right? So how many conservation practices we implemented, how much money we did, all of this good stuff that I'm going through. You can see where we've invested money. You can see it. What's cool. Right, there's all these pop-ups. You can click on anything. You can say, look, I live here. I want to click on this county. Everything in the dashboard changes to just be what you want to see. So then you unclick it to get back. And if you were like, well, I want to know how much, the ARPA money looks like. Well, you can start to see, well, only in those years was ARPA around in there. You could look at the capital fund. I don't know if I'm on the right color. Sorry. Sort of see, yeah, that must be the right color. There was a drop where ARPA came in. So you can flip through all of these pages. You just have to make sure you unclick, right, whatever you were on. You can look at reductions, right? You see all the different practices, like what does cover crop get you? Well, cover crop's kind of a big opportunity for getting phosphorus reduction practices. And you can see, within all these different practices are here on the left, and then you can see the graph colors to associate with them. And again, you can say, well, what are they doing in this county? I'll give you the data for that. So again, you can look at, all this stuff. We have the enforcement stuff that we do in here. Some of these graphs you can see, I took them out of there. You can say, well, let's look at certified small farms. You can see, again, I was saying like the referrals, like you can see the turquoise, like a fair number of these are from smaller farms, right, that we send over. You can also look at the larger farms, right, and you can see where these are. So anyway, I just encourage you to look through all of this data, figure out anything you want. And you can see over time, we've sent 238 referrals, over to A&R since I think 2018. Lots of work. So tomorrow we'll talk more about that. And I will leave it there.
Good, yeah, and when we are, I think specifically going to have you look at the MOU tomorrow.
Yep.
The report on the MOU, yeah. So committee members are able to take a look at the very short report. The memo understanding between ANR and the ag agency every year. That list of reports that Mike O'Grady walked through, this is one of them. And we're going to be asking people to come in and just walk us through each report,
It's on our.
as we talked about. Yeah. So, all right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. See you all tomorrow.